Hello, we are bringing a special program today from Tokyo. My name is Ken, Isaji Ken, and opening up table talks to look into the hot topics and of course the White House. With me today is Jeff Mason from Reuters. Jeff is a White House correspondent and has covered the presidencies of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, and of course now covering Donald Trump again. Let's hear how that is. Hi, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ken. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we met. It's been since we met in Washington in April, hasn't it? And I imagine you've been very busy today. And did you manage to take any time for your summer vacation?
You're kind to ask. Yes, I had some time off in August, and I had a nice breather. So time off is important too.
Yeah.
I've always told myself now, as a nearly 17-year White House correspondent, that when you miss one big story, especially with Donald Trump, as soon as you get back, there will be another one. So it's okay to take time off.
Okay, yes. And also Lisa Masuda from Washington, D.C. Bureau of Nippon TV will join today. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
So the Trump world is back and the whole world is watching his every move because we can't figure out what is going on in the White House. So there is much attention over Ukraine issue. Jeff, do you think that President Trump has the ability to wrapping up deals over international conflicts? How do you think?
Well, that's a very broad question. You know, there are always going to be international conflicts regardless of who is in office. I do think that President Trump has shown a keen interest in being involved in international conflicts. Of the three presidents that I've covered, I've never heard a press secretary for a president from the podium at the White House call for her boss to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. That is something that this White House and this president seem to be actively campaigning for. And that's unusual. But what underlies that is, I think, what I would just mention, which is an interest in being involved in international conflicts because it sort of fits with his deal maker image. He would like to make deals on everything from Russia and Ukraine to Gaza to conflicts between other countries. And I don't doubt that he wants that, at least in part, because he wants to avoid wars and he wants to save lives. And he has certainly emphasized that with regard to Russia and Ukraine. But there's clearly another motivation there, too, or he wouldn't be having his people call for him to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, we fear President Trump will avoid the conflicts, and he is trying to make peace in the world. And so is that, and how realistic is that Trump could actually win the Nobel Prize?
You know, there's no way for me to answer that question because I don't have the insight into how the Nobel Prize Committee makes its decision. You know, I thought it was interesting that Hillary Clinton, his former rival in 2016, said recently that she would nominate him herself if he is able to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine that involves Russia ceding back the territory that it has taken from Ukraine, which I suspect she also included Crimea in that calculation. I don't think that the outlines of a deal between Russia and Ukraine that President Trump and his people have been involved in would include something as big as that in terms of concessions by Russia. It doesn't seem like President Putin has offered anything of the sort. But I did think it was interesting that Secretary Clinton said that. As far as the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, again, I have no insight into their thinking, but I suspect that they would also take into account when looking at any nomination for President Trump, some of the other things that he has done in the world, including withdrawing funding for development and aid around the world, and also not taking action on climate change, which is something that the Nobel Peace Prize committee has certainly shown an interest in terms of rewarding others before. So my guess is that those are all factors that they would take into account.
Yeah. How do you see Lisa? Please join us.
Yeah. And, like just to add up, I'm sorry, I don't quite remember which outlet it was, but I think one of the American media reported today that at least 3 of the 5 members of the Norwegian Prize Committee has criticized President Trump publicly. So, I mean, like Jeff said, I don't think we are yet to be able to predict whether he could win the prize. But, like we really need to focus on, President Trump has been stressing out that he's solved 7 wars around the world. But I think we all need to look into each one of them and see what is going on, not just the numbers, but like see the actual conflicts that is going on around the world.
Yeah. And so, Jeff, at the recent summit between Trump and Zelensky, President Trump promised security guarantees, but didn't mention sending U.S. troops. How seriously do you think the U.S. is prepared to engage in the war in Ukraine? To the American public, Trump said that no ground troops would be sent to defend Ukraine's borders. Do you think American people prefer that the U.S. military stay out of direct involvement in Ukraine?
I think to answer that question, you have to look at how both presidents who have been in power during this war have responded. Neither President Biden nor President Trump have put U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine or offered U.S. troops to be involved in impacting that war. And I think that that is strategic, and that is related to exactly what you're asking in your question, which is a very low appetite from the American public to see a direct military involvement from U.S. troops in Europe and in this particular war. That said, of course, the United States has given a great deal of aid, money, and weapons to Ukraine, and but that has also been controversial, and it was something that President Trump put the brakes on a bit when he came into office. Now he is certainly very engaged in trying to get a deal between the two countries, and one piece of that is what you're mentioning, which is security guarantees. But it does seem like, based on President Trump's comments in the last week and even longer than that, that his expectation is that the U.S.'s European partners would take a particularly heavy lift or leading role in that. That said, I also think there are question marks around it because there isn't a deal. There isn't a peace deal yet. And if it leads to more in terms of U.S. involvement, who knows? That's something that we'll have to watch. But I think to your initial, what's underpinning your question, I think that U.S. public support for putting boots on the ground, as we would say, would not be high.
Thank you. Let me change another question. Regarding a picture of a smartphone, I read it on Jeff's X account. I heard that earlier this spring, former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was photographed using the Signal app during a cabinet meeting. It was a Reuters scoop, wasn't it?
It was a Reuters picture, yes. Not mine, but by one of my photographer colleagues, yes.
Yeah, so it was amazing for us. And is this kind of thing, kind of scoop, common in the United States?
Well, listen, we have a press pool that gets to go into meetings with President Trump, and Reuters photographers are in that press pool every day. Reuters print reporters like myself used to be in that every day, and then the White House threw out AP, Bloomberg, and Reuters from our permanent spots in the pool, which is a separate topic and a very tough issue for us and for freedom of the press. But the photographers are still there, and so they have an opportunity to take pictures like that. And my colleague who took that was very skilled and had a very good eye, which is what photographers are supposed to have. And so, yes, I'm very proud of that picture.
Yeah, we journalists have to keep a good eye to watch such a kind of issue. So, Jeff, you cover so many interesting aspects of the Trump administration. You wrote about the ballroom, the Trump perfume, and so much more. Compared to the other presidencies, always wonder how you find today's White House.
How I find today's White House generally? Well, I would say as a reporter, they definitely keep us on our toes. There's always a big story, and the president uses social media to announce a lot of his actions and his thoughts, and he also spends a lot of time talking to the press. So it's a big commitment covering this White House because there's always something going on.
Hi, Lisa. Do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a lot of surprises every single day. Like when President Trump and President Zelensky had their meetings, I was actually covering out the White House, but I actually met so many reporters who like just came back from Alaska that same morning, and this kind of like shows that a lot of people were surprised to see their meeting happen like so quickly after the Putin-Trump summit meeting. So yeah, I mean, we're getting so many surprises every single day. And also what I find, I think Jeff mentioned a little bit earlier by when I started covering the White House under the President Trump administration. I was pretty surprised to see how this administration was trying to make steps to take more control over the press. So this was something that I've never, I don't know about I don't think this ever happened during the previous administration, but this was something that I did not expect to see it happen as a journalist. So there's, yes, for sure, a lot of surprises covering this administration.
And the tariffs were a big issue too. So do you think his approach is different from his first administration? We Japanese Minister Akazawa, who serves as Japan's lead representative in tariff negotiations, he has visited the United States multiple times. Is he known among White House reporters? What kind of reputation he have?
Well, I tell you what, if you can introduce me to him, I'd be delighted to get to know him. But I don't have an impression that I can share with you about him. I do think to your broader question, comparing the president's use of tariffs in this term with his first term, that it is definitely more aggressive in his second term, which would apply, frankly, to a lot of President Trump's policies and actions in his second term. He is absolutely a man with a mission, and that mission is largely to recreate the economy and impose his will on multiple institutions, both in the United States and around the world. And his primary tool for doing that, certainly with regard to the global economy, has been tariffs. And he is using it, as you well know, using them, I should say, as you well know, as a cudgel and as a tool against both countries that are friendly to the United States and our partners and allies like Japan, as well as countries that are not. And it is the fact that he's using them particularly against allies that is a shift from how previous administrations have acted.
Yeah. So we Japanese journalists are quite interested in this negotiation, and also as a Japanese journalist, recently there has been a view that the United States and China, their connection is a little bit changed. The United States and China may not necessarily be in conflict, but rather that the two major powers could join hands to lead the world together. How do you see, such a point of view?
Well, again, to answer any of these questions, I would just go back and look at the reporting and look at what we've seen the president say and seen what the White House has said. Certainly, I think President Trump views his relationship with President Xi of China to be very important. And he has a great deal of respect for China and for Xi Jinping. That said, I think he also sees it as a competitor. As probably many others do in the United States. And the fact that their economies are very intertwined and that they are both very powerful militarily and on the international stage means that relationship is critical. And it's critical regardless of who's in power in the White House or, I guess, for that matter, in Beijing. But where that relationship is going, I think, is only time will tell. But I do suspect that we will see, a development and more developments between this administration and the administration in Beijing over the coming months and years that President Trump is in office.
In such scenario, there is concern that Japan might be overshadowed by China. How do you see such a point of view?
That's really a question for an analyst and not for me as a journalist. The only thing I think I could add to that is that President Trump certainly has made clear, I think, from his actions and his words, that he has a lot of interest in big, powerful countries and in autocratic leaders, which is a different style from democracies and from the more traditional allies that the United States has with Europe and Japan and countries that are in the G7.
Thank you. So the time is approaching. So, hi Lisa. What is the question to Jeff today?
Well, there's so many things I would like to ask, but well, one thing, I think President Trump has midterm election in his mind. So I was just wondering, well, the controversy surrounding the President Trump administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case. President Trump himself actually escalated the issue by promising his supporters to release information when he gets elected, and he obviously reversed his stance. But how do you view this situation, and what impact do you think it might have on MAGA supporters moving forward towards the midterm election?
I think it's an interesting question, Lisa, and I think that the answer is going to shift over time. I think certainly just a few weeks ago, it was the story in Washington, and it was the story largely because MAGA supporters were so upset. And it was one of the only times that I can think of in President Trump's tenure where his own supporters were starting to bail and starting to be very critical of him. I think that he has somewhat successfully moved that off of the front pages in the last couple of weeks by having a summit with President Putin, for example, and doing something that he's very good at, which is throwing a lot of topics sort of out there and having the news media focus on multiple other things. Now, that doesn't mean that the Jeffrey Epstein story is going away. And your question is about the midterms. Will it have an impact then? I think it just depends entirely on what developments occur on the Epstein story between now and next November, which of course is a lot of time. But sort of to the point that I think is underlying your question, it is a damaging issue for him. And it has been a damaging issue for him over the last few weeks. It's just hard to extrapolate whether that will still be at the top of voters' minds a year from now. And I think that applies to a lot of these things. The one thing perhaps that doesn't fall into that category is the economy. If the economy is not strong next November, that will almost certainly hurt him politically. But if it is, then it's going to help him. And it's just really hard to forecast that as well. But as far as Epstein is concerned, there are lots of twists and turns left in that story, and it certainly has the potential to damage him. It's just too far out to say whether it will damage him in that election.
Okay. So when I was asking questions around Union Station actually last Friday about the National Guard, some people mentioned that deployment was part of covering up the Jeffrey Epstein case. But what do you say to this opinion?
Again, it's not for me to share an opinion as a reporter, but I do think analytically, if you look at how President Trump has operated both as a politician and as a businessman and as a public figure before he came into politics, one of his talents as a public figure is throwing a lot of stuff out there for people to look at. And so I can understand if some of the people you spoke to consider the issue of the National Guard in Washington being one of those things. That said, the counter argument to that is President Trump has been critical of the safety situation in Washington, D.C. for some time. So I don't think it's probably fair to conclude that the only reason he brought in the National Guard was to change the subject. I suspect that was something that's been on his list completely unrelated to the story that he doesn't like, which is the Epstein story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the last topic, our Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has lost 2 national elections and 1 local election in the capital, making it 3 defeats in total. As a result, most members of his own Liberal Democratic Party are calling for his resignation. However, public opinion polls show that many people believe Prime Minister Ishiba doesn't need to step down. Whether he resigns or not is currently the biggest topic in Japanese political reporting. So, how do you find the Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's another question that I just don't really feel qualified to answer as a White House reporter. I do think that the U.S. government cares very deeply who is in charge in Japan, and it is no doubt watching these developments very closely. Certainly, I haven't spoken to anyone at the White House about this, but I suspect that they're watching it closely, as is the State Department. Because Japan, whether or not the relationship is the same as it was, under previous presidents, is still a hugely important relationship for the United States and for any administration that's in power, and that would include the Trump administration.
Yeah. So yes, as a White House reporter, you meet many presidencies from any countries, and so how many times will it be important for White House correspondent to cover Japanese Prime Minister visit to Washington?
Oh, of course, yeah. If the Japanese Prime Minister comes to Washington, that would absolutely be a big story for us, because there's no question that the Japanese Prime Minister would very, very likely meet with the president. So anything that happens at the White House is in our wheelhouse in terms of reporting, and we would certainly cover that very closely.
Thank you. So Jeff, how do you evaluate President Trump's ability to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia, and his influence over international diplomacy?
So I think one way to answer that question is to look at how the most recent talks with Zelensky at the White House went. the Europeans came with him. And that was very significant, and I think very strategic, that European leaders decided we're not going to let President Zelensky be all by himself at the White House, and in a White House that may not be looking out for his interests. And so they showed up too, and did so in a way that I think was flattering to President Trump. President Trump made a point of saying that it was either the first time or it was unusual to have that many leaders there at the same time. And those are the types of things that he likes. And he spoke about that when they were there. But, to your broader question of will they be able to achieve a deal, I think the answer to that is it's still to be determined, because there hasn't been one yet, despite the flurry of diplomacy that included the summit in Alaska with Putin and that meeting at the White House with Zelensky and European leaders. I'm sure that European leaders, as well as Japanese leaders and other leaders around the world, will be watching this very closely. And certainly it's something that the White House has a keen interest in resolving. But, that's going to require some negotiations, and it's going to require certainly Russia to make some concessions. And so far, I don't think we've seen those being made.
Jeff, thank you so much for your insightful analysis. It will help Japanese audience to understand the U.S. politics. Thank you for joining Jeff and Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, everyone. See you all again.